The air inside the derelict bus depot felt like it had been exhaled by the earth itself, cold, metallic, tasting faintly of rust and rain-soaked dust. For the first 100 words, the darkness was not just absence but presence, a slow-moving tide that pressed against the investigator's ribs, reminding him that silence can hold a truth too heavy for light. Shadows clung to the edges of the broken ticket counter, trembling slightly whenever the wind slipped through shattered windows. The moon, thin and listless, barely sketched the outline of abandoned benches, each one a ghost of waiting, departure, loss. Nothing moved, yet everything listened. Detective Elias Rowan paused near the remains of a timetable board, its faded letters curling like burnt paper. There was no reason for him to return here, no new lead, no call from the department. But the place pulled at him, the way old pain pulls at bone during storms. He wasn't sure if he had driven here consciously or if memory had guided the wheel without permission. The depot had been condemned for years. Still, the echo of a girl's laughter, faint and misremembered, seemed frozen within its peeling walls. Rain dripped from the corrugated roof in uneven beats, mimicking a hesitant heartbeat. Elias felt it sync with his own pulse, too loud in his ears. He tugged his collar up against the cold, though it did little to shield him from the creeping sensation that he was trespassing, not legally, but spiritually. Some places didn't forgive visitors. He inhaled deeply, and the smell of mildew and an old oil spill rose like something awakening. It painted over his thoughts, numbing them, making him feel as though he were walking through someone else's dream. In the far corner, a vending machine, its glass cracked but intact, reflected his silhouette back at him. A tired man, too thin, shadows under his eyes deeper than sleep could ever undo. He stepped closer. The reflection shuddered with the wind. For a heartbeat, he almost expected to see her, the girl whose name had clung to the county's throat for more than 40 years. 17, vanished June 8, 1981. But was not here. She had never been found here either. The depot was simply where Elias had last seen her photograph tacked onto an old missing persons corkboard during his rookie year. The building, the memory, the sense of failure, they fused in his mind until this place felt like a mausoleum built for guilt. His boots crushed broken glass, sending a sharp crack ricocheting through the hollow space. He froze. Not out of fear. This wasn't that kind of silence. It was worse. This was the silence that reacts, absorbs, judges. A silence that carried the weight of every unsolved case, every unanswered question. Every night he had stared at school portrait, wondering who she might have become if the world had been kinder. Elias wiped dust from a bench and sank onto it. The cushion was long gone, the metal groaned beneath him, an old spine remembering its injuries. He closed his eyes, letting the darkness settle in, thick and familiar. In it he could almost hear her, soft footsteps, uncertain breath, a voice that never reached full words. The depot was a wound, and he, willingly or not, kept reopening it. Outside, thunder muttered across the Florida sky, low, warning like a distant argument. He felt it in his chest, reverberating through old grief. The year was nearly over, yet heat still clung to the air, restless and oppressive. The storm threatened to break it open. Elias leaned forward, elbows on knees, palms pressed to his face. He wanted a cigarette. He wanted a drink. Mostly he wanted the past to release him, but it refused. It always refused. The whine of the wind rose briefly, swirling dust and leaves across the cracked tile floor. Something skittered along with them, light, metallic. Elias lowered his hands and watched as a small piece of silver slid to a stop near his boot. He frowned. There shouldn't be anything new in this place. Nothing shiny, nothing untouched by decay. He knelt, reaching out. His fingers hovered over it, feeling a tremor of recognition before he even knew what it was. The storm outside exhaled. The depot held its breath. This moment, quiet, fragile, was the first shift in a case that had long been sealed beneath the weight of time. But Elias did not know that yet. Not fully. Not the way he was about to. The object was colder than it should have been, as though it had been waiting in a pocket of dead air untouched by the living world. Elias lifted it carefully, letting the moonlight strain through the broken windows to reveal its shape. A charm bracelet. Silver, delicate, unmistakably feminine. One charm in particular caught the light, the outline of a small lighthouse. Its surface glimmered with a thin layer of dew or tears. He couldn't tell which. The lighthouse had been his favorite symbol, her journals filled with sketches of them, sometimes tall and proud, sometimes tilting precariously as though straining against invisible winds. Elias turned the bracelet over in his hand. The metal felt wrong, too clean to have been abandoned for decades, yet too worn to be new. Someone had placed it here recently, deliberately, like a message slipped under a locked door. His chest tightened. "What are you telling me?" he whispered, the words barely forming, dissolving into the heavy air before they could echo. He stood abruptly, scanning the depot with renewed intensity. Shadows clung where they always had, on pillars, behind benches, beneath the remnants of the ticket counter, yet something felt altered, as if the space, long resigned to being forgotten, had woken up at the bracelet's arrival. Lightning flickered through the windows, and for a brief moment the whole room flashed bone white. On instinct, Elias steadied himself against the bench, the bracelet clutched in his fist. He could feel the weight of the past pressing in, rearranging itself. Had disappeared in 1981, leaving no body, no witnesses, no trail. Only rumors, only nightmares, only a grieving mother who died in 1992 still clutching a lighthouse charm identical to this one. Elias swallowed hard. He had walked away from the case years ago, not because he wanted to, but because he was ordered to. Resource allocation, the department had said. Too cold, they had insisted. He remembered nodding, outwardly compliant, while internally something fractured. The charm in his hand pulsed with memory, a sharp, fragile pang. He hadn't felt this alive or this haunted in years. A metal door on the far wall slammed in the wind, but Elias flinched as though someone had shouted his name. He turned sharply, scanning again. "Who's there?" he called. Only the storm responded. A distant train horn moaned through the night, lonely, sonorous. It seeped through the depot like a memory trying to find its owner. Elias pocketed the bracelet carefully, the metal warming slowly against his thigh. It felt like a heartbeat, or an accusation. His radio crackled, a burst of static, then silence. He hadn't touched the dial. The storm interfered, he told himself. Nothing more. Yet when he lifted the radio again, he thought he heard something beneath the hiss, a faint note like a girl's voice lost in water. He lowered it slowly. "This is getting to you," he muttered. But the words lacked conviction, because something was getting to him. Something had always been getting to him, ever since he first saw tilted smile and shy eyes staring back from that missing poster. The bracelet changed everything, or worse, confirmed everything he'd always feared. Someone had kept the story alive. Someone wanted him to return. Someone was rewriting the silence. His gaze drifted back to the vending machine, that cracked reflection. He could almost picture there, translucent, quiet, waiting to be noticed. He exhaled shakily. This wasn't just a clue. This was a summons. and whoever sent it had slipped past the years like a whisper under a locked door, reaching him exactly where he was weakest. The drive back to his apartment felt longer than usual, though he had taken the same roads, passed the same flickering traffic lights, crossed the same bridge where the river reflected nothing but its own emptiness. Elias kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other curled around the bracelet in his pocket, unable to let go of its presence. It felt like gripping a piece of the past still beating. Thunder rolled again overhead, mirroring the slow churn of his thoughts. He should have called it in, should have filed a report. The sheriff followed protocol like any trained investigator. Instead, he drove home in silence, shielding the object as though it were a secret meant only for him. The rain began in a sudden sheet, smearing the world into blurred lights and jagged shadows. He turned the wipers on, though the rhythmic swipe only worsened the tension coiling inside him. He kept imagining 17, freckles fatting into summer skin, hair wind-tangled on her bike ride home, lifting her wrist to check the time, the lighthouse charm turning like a tiny compass. He had memorized her file years ago, memorized the things she loved because no one else seemed to care. His father had warned him once, "Some cases take your name before you know it." Elias had laughed then, young, foolish, believing logic was armor. But in the darkest hours of sleepless nights, he realized obsession didn't announce itself. It seeped in through cracks, curiosity at first, then responsibility, then a quiet, consuming hunger. By the time he reached his apartment, he felt hollowed out, carved into a shape that resembled a man but functioned more like a vessel for questions. He sat in the parked car for a moment, listening to the storm. The bracelet was warm now, as if holding it had revived something dormant. He checked the street, dim, empty, lined with oak trees whose branches writhed in the wind like skeletal arms. Nothing moved except the rain. Still, he felt watched. Not hunted, no, something stranger. Observed. As though someone was waiting to see what he would do next. Inside, the apartment greeted him with its usual muted gloom, sparse furniture, a stack of unsorted paperwork, half-packed moving boxes he'd never committed to. The place smelled of old coffee and stale air. He flicked on the lamp beside his worn-out couch, but the soft amber glow did little to dispel the heaviness. Elias sat, pulled the bracelet from his pocket and placed it gently on the coffee table. The lighthouse charm swung slightly, then settled. He stared at it for a long time. Wasn't family. She wasn't a friend. She wasn't even someone he had known personally. Yet the boundary between duty and desire, desire for truth, for closure, for connection, had blurred long ago. He whispered into the still room, "Why now?" The apartment didn't answer, but something inside him did. A slow, aching certainty that this object hadn't simply resurfaced. It had been delivered, and not arbitrarily. Someone knew exactly how to pull him back into the gravity of the case. Someone understood the contours of his weakness. His phone buzzed unexpectedly. Elias jumped. When he checked the screen, he found a blocked number, a text message. "Do you remember the story she told before she left?" His throat tightened. He didn't respond. Instead, he read the line again, tracing each word as though it carried fingerprints. Had told several stories, some in her diary, some to friends, some in fragments overheard. One story lingered in his memory, something about a lighthouse that shone even while drowning in fog, a beacon for the lost, a warning for the forgotten. He typed out a reply, "Who is this?" but hesitated before sending. His pulse thudded against his ribs. When he finally pressed send, the message returned an immediate failure notification. Blocked, unreachable. The room seemed to shrink around him, walls leaning closer, shadows growing fuller. He rose slowly, packing. His reflection in the window looked pale, eyes hollowed, haunted by a truth tugging at the edge of memory. He should let the department handle it. He should step back, breathe, sleep. But obsession had its own gravity, and tonight he felt himself tilting helplessly toward it. Elias stopped packing. The lighthouse charm glinted again, catching the light as though winking. He ran his hands over his face. "I'm already in," he murmured. And it was true. Duty had long since dissolved. Only obsession remained. The next morning, the sky over the Gulf was a bleached, exhausted blue, the kind that made everything look slightly unreal, as if the world had been overexposed. Elias parked outside a small, single-story house at the edge of town, its white paint worn thin by decades of sun and salt air. The wind carried the distant sound of waves and the nearer rustle of palm fronds scraping against each other like restless hands. He sat in the car for a moment, fingers drumming against the steering wheel, the bracelet once again in his pocket. The lighthouse charm felt heavier than metal should. He could feel its outline even through the fabric, like a bruise. On the porch, a woman waited. She leaned against the post as though she'd been holding herself there since dawn. Her hair, dark streaked with steel, was pulled into a loose knot, and the lines around her mouth suggested a life of clenched teeth. His younger cousin, 2 years her junior back in 1981, watched him approach with eyes that held equal parts recognition and faint reproach. "You're late," she said, though he was. Her voice was low, matter-of-fact, as if opinions and emotions had long ago been compressed into statements of fact. "Traffic," he answered, though there had been none. They both understood that excuses were just another way of saying I hesitated. He stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked, echoing softly under their feet. Behind her, the screen door rattled in the breeze. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and old photographs, even from out here, a home preserved in memory, not comfort. "You said it was important," added, pushing the screen open with a small sigh. "Important usually means bad in my experience." Inside, the living room was dim, curtains pulled halfway as if nothing outside deserved to be fully seen. Family pictures lined the walls, frames of every shape, arranged as if the past could be made orderly with enough glass and effort. Appeared in several, a girl with sun-browned cheeks and a smile that never quite revealed all her teeth, as though she was keeping something back for herself. Elias' gaze caught on one photo in particular, and side by side on a dock, bare feet dangling above dark water. His wrist glinted with a familiar silver circle. "You still wear yours?" he asked before he could stop himself. Lifted her wrist automatically, revealing a similar bracelet, though some charms were missing, the metal dulled. She let her arm fall. "Sometimes," she murmured, "some days it feels like chaining myself to a ghost." He sat on the edge of the couch, the springs sighing beneath his weight. Remained standing, arms folded, as if sitting would be too vulnerable an act. "I was at the old bus depot last night," he began. Her jaw tightened. "You're not assigned to her case anymore," she said. "Haven't been for years." "Doesn't mean I stopped thinking about it." His eyes softened, but only slightly. "No," she said, "I suppose it doesn't." He reached into his pocket and placed the bracelet on the coffee table. The lighthouse charm swung once, twice, then stilled between them. Stared. For a moment, every sound in the house, clock ticking, refrigerator humming, a neighbor's dog barking faintly, fell away. There was only breath, held and tremoring. "That's," her voice thinned, "that's hers." "It was at the depot," he said quietly, "near the old benches, like someone dropped it there on purpose." Stepped closer, fingertips hovering above the charm without touching it. Her eyes glistened, though no tears fell. She had the look of someone who had long ago learned the cost of crying in front of strangers, and then had slowly expanded that definition until it included almost everyone. She never took it off, whispered, even that night. The night she disappeared. The words sat between them, heavy, persistent. She said the lighthouse meant something, continued, eyes distant now, as if she were peering back into a memory she visited only in nightmares. Not just guidance, not just light in darkness, that's what everyone assumes. She said it was a warning. A lighthouse doesn't save ships, she told me once. It just shows them where they'll break. Elias felt that sentence move through him like a slow, serrated blade. "And you never told me that," he said, not accusing but not neutral either. "You were the cop," she replied, the faintest trace of old bitterness creeping in. "I was 16. Everyone told me to be quiet, to let the adults handle it. I thought you knew everything already." Silence stretched. Dust motes drifted in the dim light like quiet, indifferent stars. He hesitated, then said, "Someone texted me last night. Blocked number. They asked if I remembered the story she told before she left." His attention snapped back to him. She seemed to search his face for something, truth, clarity, blame. "I didn't send that," she said, "if that's where your mind is going." "I didn't say." "You didn't have to." She took a step back, arms folding again, rebuilding armor. "So now there's some mystery who knows things about her, about me, about you apparently." Elias' jaw clenched. The storm from the previous night still seemed lodged in his bones. He said quietly, "Is there anyone, past or present, who would want to stir this up? Anyone who knew her, who knew about the bracelet, the lighthouse, the depot?" Her gaze drifted to a framed photo on the mantel. A man in uniform, Sheriff Frank Heller, his predecessor, his mentor. Retired 10 years now, living north of town. Heller, who had worked case before Elias ever joined the force. Heller, who used to tell him, "Some cases are traps disguised as crusades." "He used to come here a lot," said softly. "After she vanished, Sheriff Heller said he was checking on my aunt, but he always ended up talking to me too, asking the same questions again and again, like if he poked the wound enough, the truth would bleed out." "And now?" Elias asked. She shrugged. "We don't talk. He sends a Christmas card, that's it." Emotion flickered across her face. Resentment, gratitude, something tangled between the two. "He loved the idea of her," added almost as an afterthought, "like you do." The room darkened around that sentence. Elias felt it settle on his shoulders. "You think that's what this is?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Just men who love the idea of her?" "I think," said, eyes sharp now, "that was real and complicated and scared. And everyone keeps turning her into a symbol because that's easier than admitting she was also just a girl who might have made a terrible choice or trusted the wrong person." The lighthouse charm caught a stray beam of light and flared briefly, like a tiny warning. "She was more than a case file to you," said. "Not quite a question, not quite an accusation." Elias looked at the bracelet, then at the photographs, then at. "I don't know what she is to me anymore," he admitted. "But I know whoever put that bracelet in the depot knows exactly what she is to them." Nodded slowly, as if accepting an unpleasant inevitability. "Then you'd better figure that out," she said, "before they decide to send you something else." Her gaze flicked once more to the lighthouse charm. "Warnings," she murmured. "That's what she believed in, not rescues." And Elias realized, with a slow, creeping unease, that everyone left alive in its orbit carried some piece of her like shrapnel embedded under the skin, Heller, and now himself most of all. None of them had healed. They had just learned to walk with the wound. The archive smelled like trapped time. Dry paper, stale air, faint toner, and something else underneath. Like old rain absorbed by cardboard and never fully released. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a low, insect-like persistence, casting everything in a thin, unforgiving white. Elias stood in the narrow aisle between filing cabinets, his case box open on a metal cart before him. He had signed it out under the pretense of reviewing cold cases for pattern analysis. Technically not a lie, just not the whole truth. Inside the box, folders leaned against each other like tired shoulders. The label on the side, WHITLOCK, MAREN 1981 missing person, was smudged from years of fingers. His, most of all. He put on gloves, not only for evidence integrity, but to maintain some emotional distance, however artificial. The first folder contained photographs, Polaroids from the early search, grainy black and white prints from the local paper, school pictures. He spread them on the cart, creating a fragmented mosaic of a life arrested mid-motion. Here was on the school lawn, books clutched against her chest, hair caught by a gust of wind as she half-turned toward someone outside the frame. Here she was at the beach, waist-deep in water, eyes squinting against the sun, her smile wider here, genuinely unguarded. In every photo, the lighthouse charm glinted, sometimes obvious, sometimes half-hidden in shadow, but always there, the tiny constant in a changing backdrop. He noticed something he hadn't seen years ago. The charm seemed slightly turned in most photos, rarely facing the camera directly, as if it refused to be fully captured. He picked up one Polaroid on her bike in front of a rust-flaked fence. Behind her, barely visible, a hand-painted sign pointed toward a local landmark, St. Augustine Lighthouse, 5 miles. It looked like any tourist sign. Yet the way the photographer had framed the shot, the arrow seemed to pierce the right side of the image, just above his shoulder. Guiding or accusing? He set it aside, reaching for the second folder. The diary had always been the most tantalizing piece of evidence. It had been found hidden beneath a loose floorboard in its room months after her disappearance. Her handwriting slanted slightly to the right, each line pressed firmly into the page, as if she were trying to carve her presence into the paper. Before, he'd read it like any investigator, looking for names, dates, places. Now he read it differently, as if he were listening to someone speak from far away through static and time. June 4, 1981. It's loud even when it's quiet. Like the walls remember every argument, every slammed door. I can feel it in my teeth. June 6, 1981. Dreamt of the lighthouse again. It was blinking too slow, like it was tired. I stood at the railing and tried to see the shore, but all I saw was a parking lot and the bus depot. Maybe that's the point. You go looking for the sea and end up somewhere else entirely. Elias' pulse quickened, the bus depot again, the lighthouse again, patterns circling back on themselves. Further in, a line circled in red pencil caught his eye, something he had underlined years ago. Something is wrong with the way he looks at me, like he's not seeing me, but some story he wants to tell about me. I'm tired of being someone's idea. He had always assumed he referred to a boyfriend, a teacher, some unnamed man in her orbit. Now, with the bracelet in his pocket and its words echoing in his mind, the pronoun felt less like a clue and more like a mirror. He flipped ahead. June 8, 1981, last entry. If I don't write it down, it'll feel like it never happened. But if I do, it becomes real. I keep thinking about the lighthouse. Still blinking. Still trying. I wonder if there's a moment just before everything breaks when the light hits the rocks in exactly the right way and